Greetings gamers, my name is Anto, and in this video I want to show you how to get started being a Dungeon Master or a Game Master for tabletop RPGs. This video is sponsored by Limitless Champions, now on Kickstarter, more on them later. I've been playing tabletop games now for more than 20 years and I am on my third consecutive long-running campaign with the same group of players, and I want to help you get into being a Game Master, show you some of the top tips for getting started, alleviate some of the common fears people have, and just help you get to the table and have more fun with your friends as quickly as possible. Everything that I'm going to talk about is going to be time-stamped down in the video description, and you'll see the little bar at the bottom of the screen for you to jump around, so we're just going to dive straight into it. So the first thing I want to do is talk about why you'd want to be a Game Master. Chances are you want to be a Game Master because nobody else will do it and you really want to play a TTRPG. There are some people who see actual plays or hear about things and want to be a Game Master for its own sake, but in my experience most people end up kind of falling into the role of Game Master because they really want to play a game and no one else has taken up the mantle. So the role of the Game Master is pretty well defined in most systems. You're going to be part storyteller, weaving together all of these narrative threads, all of the plots for your players. You're going to be part narrator, telling the players what they encounter as they move through the world, and you're going to be part rules referee, kind of adjudicating the rules when it comes to the mechanical interactions of the game. An important thing to note about being a Game Master though is it's not you versus the players. It's not the players versus the Game Master. You're all at the table, you're all collaborating to tell these stories. It's not an adversarial relationship. As it is with all things when it comes to games, fun is the most important element, and that's important to keep in mind as a Game Master. The fun that you and your players are having is the most important thing, well above anything else. So to get started to be a Game Master, the very first thing that I would recommend you do is pick up the core rulebook for whatever system you want to run. So pick up your player's handbook, your core rulebook for Pathfinder, whatever the system may be. Pick up the book that's going to teach you the rules of the game. Before you start running, you want to have a reasonable grasp on the rules or know a little bit more than the players, because you're going to have to interact with a lot more of the rules elements than they are. Next, I'd recommend you go out and you buy the Game Master's Guide or Dungeon Master's Guide for your particular system. If you're running D&D 5th edition, it's going to be the Dungeon Master's Guide. Now this book, in my opinion, isn't the greatest. It's got a lot of information in here that's either really poorly laid out or not necessarily the kind of things that a first-time Dungeon Master is going to want to see, but it does have a lot of information that will be useful for you running specifically 5th edition stuff. In terms of the best written DMG for any system, I highly recommend the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. This thing is packed with information on just being a Game Master and not tied to the mechanics of the system. The first 30 pages are just advice on how to be a Game Master and nothing to do with the rules. From there, head to YouTube, watch videos like this. You're probably already on that step, so good for you. You're ahead of the curve. Tick in the checkbox for that. But there's so many resources to teach you about different approaches to different scenarios in role-playing games, to give you perspective you've never thought of, and to give you ideas on how to improve your games. I will give a word of warning when it comes to watching actual play content, things like Critical Role and Dimension 20 and those kind of high production value shows. They are shows and their primary purpose is to entertain the viewer and not necessarily to be an accurate representation of what goes on at the table. So just watch them with caution, because it's really easy to slip into the mindset of, why am I not as good a Game Master as Matt Mercer? Why are my players not as good as the players from Dimension 20? And that kind of thinking can cause a lot of friction between Game Masters and players on both sides. So just watch with caution and don't expect all of your sessions to look exactly like that. So once you've read the books and you've prepared yourself mentally for the challenge of being a Game Master, it's time to assemble your group. And this is where the first big hurdle that you're going to come across will jump out at you, and that is scheduling. Scheduling kills more campaigns than anything else, probably than every other cause of campaign death put together. More than all TPKs or problem players or life getting in the way. Just being able to schedule your game is going to be the biggest problem that you're going to have. My recommendation, if you can, if you're going to run every week, set aside a specific day and a time. In my case, we run on Wednesday nights at 7:30 and have done for the last 6 years. So my players all know Wednesday night is game night, so we don't make plans on Wednesday nights. Or if we do, They are plans that are replacing playing games, and we're going to contact Danto and be like, hey, can't make it on Wednesday because I'm doing this other thing. I'd also recommend that you try and get into the habit of running as long as a couple of the players are there. So my general table rule is if 2 players are there, no matter what the size of the party, I'm running. And those 2 players are going to get some kind of session. Doing this means that the players that aren't there do miss out on some things, but initially that can really help get them into the mindset of, oh, this is game night. I'm missing out on cool stuff. I'm going to make sure I'm going to be there. My other top tip at this stage is be wary of group sizes. I typically like to run for 4 people, sometimes 5, but as soon as you get over 5, I find that it really starts to get more and more difficult to run a really nice game because you're having to deal with longer combats because there are more people involved. Everyone gets less kind of screen time on them to shine because there are more people involved. There's more types of character in the party, which can lead to greater imbalances, and the more people you add, the more those problems compound. Once you've got some DMing experience under your belt, those problems are easier to manage, but certainly if you're just getting started, try and stick to no more than 4 people. It's just going to make your life so much easier and give you that little bit of breathing space to be able to handle some of the other things you have to do while you're game mastering. So let's go through a quick list of the basic things that you want to bring to the table as a game master. What's your game master starter set, as it were? So the first thing is obviously the books, the core rule book, and maybe the game master's guide for your system. You want to bring those with you. You also want to bring character sheets if you're running for people that have never played before, either some pre-generated or blank character sheets that you can go over with the players. Those are going to be great. Then dice, lots and lots of dice, as many sets of polyhedrals as you can get your hands on. As you go along, players probably will start bringing their own dice, but there's always going to be someone that doesn't, so try and bring as many dice as you can. Then paper and pens, obviously you're going to want to make notes, you're going to want to scroll down little things to hand to the players for handouts. You might want to make a small scribbly battle map for them. Paper and pens, always a really useful thing to carry. And speaking of battle maps, they are optional, but if you are running that kind of tactical grid combat, they can make a world of difference. A roll of wrapping paper with 1-inch grids on the back of it can be ideal for this and is a really cheap option, or you can get like dry or wet erase marker versions, or even neoprene mats or full custom setups with loads of terrain. You can go as complicated as you want, but you can keep it simple as just a big piece of paper that you draw on is more than enough most of the time. And then finally, the last optional thing in your DM kit should be a DM screen or a GM screen. This isn't always necessary. Some people do like to roll out in the open and not keep things hidden, but especially when you're getting started, it just gives you that barrier, a little bit of private space to help you organize your thoughts and hide some things away, make notes. Just helps you collect yourself a little bit more, I think. So you've prepared all of your things, you've gathered your players together, it's time to get started. So where do you start as a game master? I'd recommend starting as small as possible, probably by running a pre-written adventure module, a short one for your players. The starter sets for most systems are ideal for this. Things like the Lost Mines of Phandelver or the Pathfinder starter set over here. They contain a complete adventure that's pre-written with all the encounters ready to go and maps and all that stuff pre-done, pre-made characters, an out-of-the-box experience for you to be able to sit down and just get used to the mechanics of the game and the process of being a game master. If you want to start by making your own world, I recommend starting really small. Start with a small town or find a pre-made town to add some flavor to yourself. Don't do what I always do, which is start with the entire world and go down. That scratches my world building itch because I love to world build, but it's a lot. So I would not recommend it if you're just getting started. When I first got started as a game master, what I did was I ran a short pre-made Pathfinder Society adventure. It was like a 2-session long adventure for my players, like 2 months before we started the campaign, just for us to get used to the concept of the game, a little bit of the rules, using the VTT we were using at the time, and then I went away and I spent a couple months building out the homebrew world and a small place for them to start in, and we started with homebrew adventures. Before you do start any adventures though, I highly recommend that you have a session 0 with your group. This is a place where you can lay out your expectations, find their game expectations, set up table rules, and just figure out that you're all on the same page for what you're about to do. I won't go into too much depth on this because I do have a whole video on it up here that you should absolutely go and check out at the end of this video, but this is another thing that is going to save your campaign from so many headaches in the future, because so many problems just come from a misalignment between the players and the game master. This video is sponsored by Limitless Champions, which are bringing the largest and most diverse collection of disability-themed fantasy miniatures to Kickstarter. This campaign is the follow-up to the Limitless Heroics book, which introduced hundreds of new traits that allow you to play characters of a range of disabilities in your 5th edition game. Limitless Champions is bringing a range of those characters to life as miniatures. Each character is modelled to represent a specific condition or disability to provide more diversity for your games. There are 20 miniatures as part of the base goal, representing a wide variety of disabilities and conditions, and they are available as both physical and digital STL minis. You'll also be able to pick up digital or printed tarot-sized cards to include these characters in your campaigns as NPCs. The Kickstarter is live right now, and you can follow the link in the description to check it out and pledge your support. There's a bunch of great stretch goals planned, including bringing fantasy service animal minis to the table, as well as rules for using them in game. Check out Limitless Champions on Kickstarter, and thanks again to Windworks Publishing for supporting the channel. Once everybody is on the same page, it's time to start your very first session, and a lot of people get really nervous before their first session, so let's try and put some of those fears to rest. When it comes to your first session, you can expect between 30 and 60 minutes of kind of setup and wind down time at the end of your session. So if you said we're going to play for 4 hours this week, you can expect about an hour of that is purely going to be non-game related stuff as you all arrive and have a bit of a chat, and then as you end and kind of wrap up. So you don't need to worry about planning 4 solid hours of content, you just need to worry about 3 hours of content. And a good general rule of thumb for most systems is that an encounter is going to take about an hour for a 4-person party. So that includes kind of the setup, the actual encounter itself, and the resolution. So if that is a combat encounter, say your players are on the way to a dungeon and they're going to fight a bunch of skeletons and zombies, your setup would be them finding out about the dungeon, heading over there, anything that might distract them on the way, arriving at the dungeon and deciding who's going to be the one that goes through the door first, which can take a surprising amount of time, you'd be surprised. And then the main encounter itself would be fighting the skeletons, fighting the zombies. And then the resolution to the encounter is going to be looting the bodies, figuring out where to go next, re-establishing your marching order, all those kind of things. So that encounter would take about an hour of gameplay. So in a 4-hour session, with your 30 to 60 minutes of setup and wrap-up time, you're going to want 3 encounter blocks to prep for. Now, obviously, as you all learn the rules, these things are going to get faster. Some game systems run a little bit faster, but it's a reasonable rule of thumb when you're first getting started. When it comes to prepping for your session, if you only have an hour or less a week to prepare for your games, I highly recommend running a pre-written module. It'll take care of a lot of the work for you. It'll take care of a lot of the encounter building and the plot elements, and you can really focus in on how the characters are going to interact with that story. If you have more than an hour and you're running a homebrew session, I recommend focusing on the early stuff first. So the setup for the adventure, the first couple of encounters, those are the things that you want to devote most of your attention to, and then everything else can be kind of more nebulous and vague notes the further away from that starting point that you get. And with those nebulous parts, those are a great place to incorporate some improv, which is something that a lot of game masters really struggle with. It's one of the most common things I hear from game masters about being a struggle is improv. So let's talk about some ways that you can improve your improv. Because no matter how well you prepare, the players are almost always going to go off course at some point, and you need to figure out a way to get those tracks back in front of the train before it goes off the rails too badly. Now, in my experience, there are 2 main ways to improve your improv game, and both of them involve planning, which is kind of counter to what you think of when you think of improv, but it's going to make your life much easier. The first of them is world knowledge. So if you're running a pre-written adventure, knowing the world that that adventure is set in, knowing the adventure back to front is really going to help you do improv when the players go off the reservation. If you're running a homebrew world, the more you know about the world, the more you can give contextual improv that feels like it has always been part of the world. So for example, in my homebrew setting of Ishtar, we've been running in that for like 7 years, 6-7 years now. We've run through multiple areas of the world. I have a lot of it planned out. So I know if the players decide, oh, we're just going to get on a boat and head off away from where we are, I know I have some core information about most of the world when they arrive, I could give them an improv session that would get me to the end of the session, and then I can prep things for the next week. The other thing that's really going to help your improv is lists, random lists. This is going to come up a couple times in this video, but I don't think anything that is random should be random, because you want to make your life easier. And in this case, keeping lists of as many things as possible is really going to help you when it comes to improv. So lists of names, lists of occupations and descriptions of NPCs, lists of descriptions of rooms or the names of shops in a city. All these kind of things will help when the players go, instead of going right, I'm going to go left, and I'm going to go talk to those 3 people that didn't have names until 5 seconds ago. So I'm going to look at my list, give you the first 3 names, and it feels like they've always had names. Now let's talk about some common problems you might run into as a new game master. First off, I'm going to keep repeating it, but scheduling. Scheduling is the biggest problem you're going to come into, and you want to sort it as soon as possible. If you have a busy lifestyle or circumstances mean you can't play on the same day every single week, what I recommend is trying to give the players as much notice for the available game dates as possible. Let's say at the start of the month, say, here are 6 days this month that I am free. When are you folks free? And as soon as everyone is free on one of those days, mark it in your calendar. Actually write it down in a calendar somewhere, either on Google Calendar or physical, because that'll really help, and get that locked in. The next big problem you're going to have as a game master at some point is going to be a character death. The first time this happens, you might be stumped and not know what to do, so let's give you a couple tips on the best ways to navigate that. The first thing you want to do is you want to try and telegraph danger as much as possible. So if the players are encountering a monster that is particularly deadly, you want to give them indications that this is a difficult monster so that they don't just rush in ahead of time. This might be employing an NPC to serve as a red shirt and go in and get torn apart to show the power of the monster. It might be have the monster attack them, do a whole bunch of damage, and then flee to give them the chance of going, oh, this is a really powerful monster, we need to heal up and chase. Or it could just be word of mouth through the NPCs saying, oh, Lord Soth is an incredibly dangerous dude. Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to player death is don't punish your players. Yeah, it probably makes sense that if an NPC knocks them out that they deliver a killing blow, but that just feels bad in most circumstances. So if you want to do something like that, or if you think it's something that that enemy would do, telegraph that to the players. Have the NPC stop and be like, surrender or I'll execute your friend. Give them some warning that this thing might happen. Another thing you can do to help the players kind of not feel so bad about character death is give them some final words. Give them closure for that character. So if you're in the middle of a fight and a player dies, yeah, mechanically they're dead, but have their character kind of survive until the end of the fight to give some final words to the other players before they actually die. That helps give the players a chance to say goodbye to their characters. And then finally, speak to the player about what they would like to do in regards to like resurrection. In a lot of fantasy games, it's possible to revive characters. If that's something the player wants to do, speak to them about how you can incorporate that. Maybe they bring in a temporary character while you go off on the quest or something along those lines. A lot of that is also going to apply to a TPK, a total party kill, but you've got a couple of other things that you really want to think about in those kind of situations. When it comes to the threat of a TPK, I really like to remind my players that retreat is an option. It's very rare that they're going to take this option. For some reason, players always get it into their head that we're going to fight to the death in every single battle, and retreat is never an option. But I like to just gently remind them that, hey, you could run away from this and, live to fight another day, come back stronger, and that kind of stuff, just so that they're not completely flummoxed when they die. For example, in my last campaign, it was a fairly open sandbox campaign. At the start of the campaign, I'd warned the players there are going to be instances where you come across something that is too powerful for you. You wanted a sandbox world where everything kind of exists in its place. This is the result. There are places where there are dangerous monsters, and if you stumble into them, you might end up biting off more you can chew and have to retreat. So they arrived at a location and it was literally signposted in every language known to man, like how dangerous this place was. And obviously I thought that would be a good telegraph to say, this is a dangerous place, probably too high level for you. They took it as, ooh, whatever's in here must be really cool, let's go in. And they all died. So you've got to strike that balancing act of telegraphing danger, but also not advertising it as being, hey, super high level loot in here. Another thing you're likely to come across at some point in your GM career is going to be problem players. Now, I've said before that I don't think most problem players are actually problem people. I think it's a misalignment of expectation. You expect them to do one thing, they expect you to do another, and those things don't align. And that's where a session 0 is going to come in really helpful to help kind of smooth out that expectation, make sure everyone's on the same page. If you do have a problem player, the first step I think is always to approach them and have a delicate and kind conversation. The kind of thing where you're saying, hey, I noticed you were doing X or Y, or you weren't paying as much attention this week. Is everything okay? Is there anything I can do? And approach them in an accommodating way. If that doesn't fix the problem, then you move into kind of warning territory and being like, hey, we've spoken about this. This is a problem now. Can you please stop? And then if they don't stop, then you have to have the difficult conversation to say, hey, look, I think that what you want from this game and what this game is giving you just isn't aligned. You know, this isn't the game for you. It's never a fun conversation to have, but it can keep your entire campaign from dying because one problem player can really upset the balance of a game and cause it to die. And then the final problem that you're going to come across as a game master is you. You are the problem. So sometimes you are going to make bad rules calls. You're going to make decisions that don't work or miss story beats, and you're going to need to know how to fix that. In most situations, the answer is just open and honest communication with your players. If you make a bad rules call, just say, hey folks, I misread the rules or misinterpreted them. Can we roll back to before this point happened and do a do-over? Because I don't think it's fair that I've misrepresented the rules to you and you've suffered as a result. Or if you've forgotten some key information, you might say, hey folks, I forgot. I didn't tell you this before because I missed it, but here's a piece of key information you need. Or if you don't want to do something so blunt, you pick that information up, move it to a new point in front of the players. If they're at a door and they don't know how to open it, then give them some information in the room that they're in that would have otherwise been in a separate room. Same with encounter difficulty. If you throw something that's too powerful at the players, don't be afraid to reduce its hit points or reduce how hard it hits. Have some enemies flee when they get injured, those kind of things to limit the severity of the encounter you've thrown at the players. And then finally, if you make the players too powerful, which is really easy to do by giving them too many magic items or too much gold, you need to find a way to reduce that. That could be, again, an open and honest communication of, hey folks, I've given you way too much gold. You're absolutely destroying everything. Can we dial it back a little bit? Or you find an in-universe way of doing that. An example from one of my campaigns is the players bought most of their items from a single seller and they were well overpowered for what they should have been. That seller turned out to be evil. A lot of the items that they bought were cursed, so they had to get rid of them. That gave them a kind of defeat in character, but it also brought them down in power level to where they should be mechanically. And those are my thoughts for getting started as a game master. If you have any questions about how to be a game master or your very first session, throw them down in the comments below and myself or one of the other wonderful game masters of the community will be sure to answer them. If you haven't already, check out my session 0 video because that's going to help you avoid a lot of problems in your first couple of campaign sessions. But until next time, happy gaming.